Welcome to Retroality TV presents Reimagine That with Chris Mann, offering refreshing reality with a retro twist. This week, Chris interviews the author of Funny, the book, television writer David Misch, and we'll explore our inner nighttime psychological stirrings with our very own dream interpreter, Yvonne Reba. And now, introducing your host, Chris Mann.
Thank you, Linda Kay, our vintage-voiced announcer and producer, and welcome everyone to episode 15 of Reimagine That, the Retroality.tv podcast, where retropop meets forward thought, or as I like to think of it these days, the podcast where we help you separate your Shazbots from your Fembots. Oh yeah. It's July 24th, and to start the show, a show with the theme of Reimagining Funny. Ironically, on a sad note, we just learned of the passing of Sherman Hemsley, George Jefferson, for those of us in the 70s and 80s who grew up watching the Jeffersons on Sunday nights. This is an especially sad piece of news. He was 74. I immediately thought back to my elementary school years, and in a moment I interview David Misch, the author of the new book, Funny, the book. He was also a writer on Mork Mindy, and I share with David in my interview the impact that Mork Mindy had on me as a kid. The Jeffersons also had a huge impact on me, and I immediately thought back to a day in second grade. My best friend at the time, her name was Michelle, and she was just as goofy as I was, and we used to crack each other up across the classroom. We had this really, old, decrepit, should have retired in the 30s teacher named Miss Hauser, and she did not appreciate our sense of humor. I remember one day we were goofing. She separated us from one side of the class to the other, and I got up and started doing the George Jefferson strut to the front of the classroom, singing moving on up, and she started cracking up, and we had this thing back and forth. Well, Miss Hauser wasn't having it, and I remember she said to us in deep frustration, "Are you two having an affair?" Well, needless to say, I didn't know what an affair was, but the moment has stuck with me, so thank you, Sherman Hemsley. Also, a few years ago, I was cleaning out a storage unit that I have in LA and was going through, moving things around, all sorts of junk and memorabilia and whatnot, and I came across my school pencil box from second grade that I kept my crayons in and my erasers and everything. And I opened it up, and I had scrawled inside the bottom of the lid, "Beans don't burn in the kitchen." And when I saw that, I think I died. I was in tears laughing. Of course, it was "Fish don't fry in the kitchen. Beans don't burn on the grill." I think that was the correct lyric. I had them mixed up. But you know what? It stuck with me, that theme, and George Jefferson and Wheezy, and I pay tribute. Thank you for all the laughter and the good times. Good times, that's a whole other show, but thank you, Mr. Hemsley. I know Wheezy's been waiting up there for you for a few years to give you a big old hug and then smack you in the face with a great big old pillow in that eternal deluxe apartment in the sky. The Jeffersons certainly, just like its mother show, All in the Family, allowed American audiences to reimagine funny by poking fun at bigotry and all of those related isms that those breakthrough shows in the 70s brought into our living rooms and started to take on these taboo subjects with humor, whether it was biting satire or, in the case of the Jeffersons, more of a slapstick, over-the-top silliness. I think of Sherman Hemsley calling his best friend on the show a honky, Mr. Willis. Not Willis from What You Talking About Willis fame, but Mr. Willis. And those Norman Lear shows and everything that flowed from them, including Maude and Good Times, and in the case of the Jeffersons, its executive producers began as writers, Emmy-winning writers on All in the Family. Don Nickel, Mickey Ross, and Bernie West, all who have since passed. But they went on to create Three's Company, will adapt the British version of the show, Man About the House, for U.S. audiences, making it more of a sexy, titillating bedroom farce, at least in the first couple or so seasons. Then it became more of a broad physical comedy, which I think those years, once Don Knotts came in and then Priscilla Barnes, when Suzanne Summers left the show, to me, those years in their own way are just as special and in a sense nearly as iconic as the late 70s years of Three's Company. But it is those initial years of Three's Company that seem to keep being satirized and analyzed in the media over and over. And currently, an off-Broadway playwright has reimagined Three's Company with his controversial new play 3C, Three's Company, 3C. Yeah, there are more than just some coincidental similarities there between those two properties. And the owners of Three's Company, New York-based company called DLT Entertainment, which is run by Don Taffner Jr., the son of the late Don Taffner Sr., the executive who really helped pioneer the Americanization of British sitcoms in the 70s. He was the guy responsible for hiring executives and creative producers in the United States to bring Three's Company into American households. Well, Don Taffner Jr. is now in charge, and he and his attorneys have issues with this new play 3C. I will get into those issues here momentarily, but let me just say that David Misch is the author of the book on Funny the book. I literally wrote the book about Three's Company, the behind-the-scenes story of the show, Come and Knock on Our Door, which I am currently preparing a new revised edition of, if not for late 2012, to coincide with Three's Company's 35th anniversary this year, then definitely sometime in 2013. And just when I thought everything was sort of wrapped up in a nice bow with Joyce DeWitt and Suzanne Summers making peace in December with their historic YouTube reunion, there is more dissent on the Three's Company front. And as the guy who wrote the book on Three's Company and who experienced that show not only as a viewer, I grew up on Three's Company. It premiered right before I turned 5, and some of my earliest memories when I wasn't having an affair in the 2nd grade with my virtual Wheezy Jefferson. But most of my vivid sitting in front of the TV memories center on Three's Company and Jack Tripper, Janet Wood, Chrissy Snow. Then I got to know the show very intimately in the 90s when I interviewed virtually the entire cast and crew for Come and Knock on Our Door, had really amazing, unprecedented access to John Ritter and Joyce DeWitt in particular for that book, as well as the creative producers and the Emmy-winning director from season 3 on, Dave Powers, who had multiple Emmys coming in from the Carol Burnett show, and including the multiple Emmy-winning Don Knotts and the Golden Globe-winning Norman Fell. John Ritter would get the show's 2nd Golden Globe as well as its first Emmy, long overdue for him and the show, in 1984, the final season of the show. So the show has resonated in the 70s and in the 80s, and in the 90s I feel like I was able to help bring it back, and that was in a meaningful way. Not that the show ever really went away, but I feel like I brought it back and really sort of promoted the heart and soul of the show, as told by the stories of the heart and soul of those people who created the show, who created those characters, who breathed multi-dimensional life into really pretty one-dimensional, farcical characters. John, Joyce, and Suzanne in particular deserve immense credit for that. And one thing that I found was that they were all very grateful, especially John and Joyce, that someone was coming through and giving the show a serious look, looking at what they did, the merits of farce comedy, the limitations of those characters, but what they were able to do with physical comedy and bringing the relationships of the characters with really their own personalities, their own heart and soul. That is what endeared that show to audiences, children of all ages. The show still has a life on TV Land, and I believe Antenna TV airs it as well. So it never really went away, but I felt like I was able to sort of expose its many layers in the late 90s with my book, and then the 2-hour E! True Hollywood story that I pitched as the first of its kind to E! And then that led to a high-rated 2-hour NBC movie, unauthorized. So Taffner has seen the show be commented on, critiqued, exploited, so on and so forth, and they've been very smart to allow that to happen for the most part. I think that Don Sr. passed away in the last year, but I think in the 90s and beyond, he looked at the intentions of those such as myself who wanted to come in and give a sort of blood and guts look at Three's Company, the true Hollywood story, the true human story. And really, let's face it, the show was critically panned. So I covered all of that, but I covered it in a fair way and in a reverent way, even if at times my humor is irreverent. I never wanted to insult the material, and I didn't. And I don't think I ever insulted the actors or the producers, even though I let them insult each other in the book. But as an author, I was very careful not to do that. I appreciated all of the crap that they put up with from critics, snotty critics in particular, who quite clearly, many of them never saw the show. They just wanted a whipping boy, and following the critically acclaimed and socially relevant and witty at times sitcoms of the 70s, MASH, All in the Family, and so on. Three's Company brought a real youth appeal and a whimsical silliness and sort of flying in the face of all of that social relevance. Ironically, orchestrated by some of Norman Lear's best writers. People didn't realize that at the time. So that was one of the things that I was proud to present in the book. Hey, the people behind Three's Company came from the stage. They came from Norman Lear. They came from Emmy-winning comedy. They were given a contemporary French farce, started out more as a sex farce, became more a physical farce, very limiting. It was not a character comedy, and yet they infused dimension into that, and I was proud to be able to salute that with Come and Knock on Our Door. But the playwright of 3C, David Misch, he is a very accomplished playwright. He obviously wasn't taking a journalistic approach. He was taking a very artistic approach in his reimagining or deconstruction or deep analysis, subversive analysis of Three's Company. And creatively, that's his right, correct? Well, maybe not. Who, first of all, is able to say what is funny, what is art? All of that is subjective, but all of those things intersect in this play, along with the resulting question, what is fair use of copyrighted material? Three's Company is copyrighted, owned by the same company that made the show possible, the Taffner Company, DLT Entertainment. So it's proprietary to them, but there is something called the Fair Use Law, which allows writers, artists, etc., to comment on copyrighted material, to analyze it deeply, to make parodies of it. This play, though, may cross over into a line of going beyond fair use. DLT Entertainment recently sent a cease and desist order to Mr. Ajmi, demanding that he stop all productions, publication of the script, any future life of 3C after it wrapped its 5-week run on July 15th at the Rattlestick Playwrights Theater in New York. He essentially complied, gave the impression anyway, though not in writing, that he would cease future activity with this play. But recently it came out in the New York Times, and most recently today in the Wall Street Journal, that he's having second thoughts. And the New York community, the New York theater community is getting behind this playwright and taking a stand against what they're characterizing as bullying by DLT Entertainment and their attorneys, who say that this isn't just a casual fair use of copyrighted material to create a new artistic commentary, but in fact they've crossed the line with a level of duplication. There are supposedly 17 elements that DLT attorneys outlined in a letter to Mr. Ajmi, saying that, look, from the characters to the sets to the plot lines, right down to the basic premise of a guy living with two girls in late 70s Santa Monica and pretending to be gay, all that's the same. The playwright takes that and flips it on its head and really does a dark take on all of the supposed anxieties being suppressed by those characters that we saw in Three's Company. And his play is dark. Others have characterized it at times as maybe mean-spirited. I haven't seen the play. Recently received the script, not in time to critique it line by line for this show, but enough to know, they take some real liberties using the words dyke and faggot, making the Janet character named Linda, who works in a flower shop, hate herself and call herself a dyke and have all these insecurities about her weight and so on and so forth. Again, very creative, very interesting, but is it legal for him to go to those lengths? The Chrissy character is named Connie. She is a minister's daughter, just like Chrissy Snow in Three's Company. The Larry character is named Terry. Gee, where have we heard that character's name before? The Jack character, the Ropers, are named the Wickers, and Mr. Wicker makes gay jokes at the Jack character's expense. I can't remember offhand what the Jack character's name is in the play, but it's it's Three's Company. And when I first saw this, I thought, oh my God, how are they doing this? Now, Three's Company has been spoofed recently in everything from a dragged production in San Francisco to a puppet show. I don't know if they were sexual puppets. Maybe that would have been cause for alarm, but a puppet show. A porno. I didn't hear any legal fuss about that. But Taffner's issue with this play in particular, DLT Entertainment is saying, look, we have plans for a theatrical stage production of Three's Company. James Franco approached us to do a play when he did his art installation, I think that's what they called it, of Three's Company a year and a half ago at Sundance. And they've commissioned a script supposedly for a second project with a sitcom writer to do a stage version of Three's Company. They're saying this 3C could harm our commercial venture with this property onto the stage. So it's all very interesting, and I intend to cover this at greater length as this story develops. But I just wanted to, right now, at this time, bring in my unique vantage point briefly, expounding on what I said in introducing my discussion here about the Three's Company book and so on and so forth. I am certainly no lawyer. I'm no legal expert. I am no theater critic. But I did write the book on Three's Company, and I do feel like I speak on behalf of those who have passed. NRW, John Ritter, Don Knotts, Norman Fell, and Audra Lindley, whose characters are exploited, reimagined in 3C. And I haven't seen the play, but I've read publicity pertaining to the play, and some of the actors from the play have referred to Three's Company as being homophobic and misogynistic. Really don't remember Three's Company being woman-hating, maybe chauvinist on camera, speaking strictly about the product that we saw on TV. But misogynistic? Homophobic? Well, kind of like Archie Bunker being the bigot, Norman Fell's character, Mr. Roper, and later to a lesser extent, Don Knotts as Mr. Furley, they were seen as the buffoons. Yeah, they were homophobic, but the show clearly illustrated, as Norman Lear did with Archie Bunker, that these bigots, these homophobes, were the idiots. The laugh was at their expense. Now, everyone's going to have their different reading of a text and their different perceptions of performance and nuances and read between the lines, and people were turned off by any gay jokes, and that's certainly everyone's prerogative. But I believe I can speak on behalf of those who wrote those characters, created those characters, gave flesh and blood to those characters, that there was no gay-hating or woman-hating intention. So I understand if that's part of the concern that Taffner has, the way that the actors of this play have portrayed their source material. So my whole point, especially when critics are once again using this 3C play to take a swipe at Three's Company, critics who, again, I don't think really got the show. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but who have just been so dismissive and in my opinion, really disrespectful to the memory of especially John Ritter, who was a comedic genius. Aside from the physical comedy, that man could take a line and give it so much charm and life and hilarity with his facial expressions and his delivery, his comic timing. Joyce DeWitt was perhaps one of TV's most underrated straight men, and that's no gay pun. And Suzanne Summers as Chrissy Snow, there was a great deal of brain power behind that dumb blonde. So to take this and to sort of take the media's portrayal of Three's Company through the years and present that as this is a fact, this show was all of these horrible things, and we are sort of exposing that or deconstructing that in this play, that's where I have the problem, because I think that's an affront to everyone who created the show, who contributed to the creative spirit of Three's Company, that endeared that show to America, that made that show iconic, that has kept that show in the public consciousness to one degree or another. John Ritter's show, 8 Simple Rules, did a whole 30-minute send-up on Three's Company about 10 years ago. It goes away, but it never really stays away because it's in people's hearts. And I know that may sound corny, but it's the truth. So my advice, I'm no lawyer, but my advice to those who are so fortunate to participate in this deconstruction of Three's Company, watch the show, study it a bit. Try to appreciate the times. Try to appreciate the style of comedy, the genre. They were doing a farce. They were quite aware of the homophobic jokes being at the expense not of the gay community, but of these bigots. Reread the text. And if you don't agree with me, at the very least, demonstrate an appreciation for the actors, the writers, the producers who created this iconic material that has given you the opportunity to satirize it, to make light of it, to make dark of it, whatever it is you make of it. If you're participating in this, show that reverence so that maybe then the critics won't just pile on, and maybe the people at DLT Entertainment won't be so sensitive. But I have a feeling that if this play resurfaces, it's going to have to alter itself considerably to be safe from a lawsuit from DLT Entertainment. So stay tuned. In the Wall Street Journal article out today, the DLT attorney, Jonathan Reichman, said that they may have given the playwright permission to proceed with this parody, to proceed with this generous, significant reuse of their copyrighted material, but the playwright didn't come to them, and the attorney said, quote, "People come to us respecting the property, people who want to do a new take on it, who want to exploit it in a commercial way, etc. And they may have meant respect the property in a financial, legal sense, but I think there's a double entendre there. I really do. And how apropos for Three's Company, right? But I believe my reading of that, knowing the people who own the show to a degree, and certainly knowing the people who created and gave life to that show, respect the property in terms of show some appreciation for what we did to put together this beloved piece of pop culture history. Show appreciation for that, and then do your own dark take on it. That's my feeling. Respect it in that regard when you're speaking in interviews. Homophobic and misogynistic, those are huge, powerful, negative, really, I think, unwarranted words to describe your source material. So reimagine that, okay? On a final note, I just wanted to share that I am in the process of interviewing Suzanne Summers for a Well Bella magazine cover story for their October issue in connection with Suzanne's upcoming Lifetime series, The Suzanne Show. I asked her about that. I asked her about her new book, her new role as a crusader for alternative medicine. I asked her about Joyce DeWitt. I asked her about Three's Company in respect to her recent decision to share so publicly her stem cell breast reconstruction surgery. So that's part of what I'm doing these days, writing celebrity health stories for various magazines, including Well Bella and its sister publication, Muscle and Body. Both of these publications are monthly magazines distributed nationally through GNC stores. And I have to say that this month, the July issue of Muscle and Body, I interview 7 different Olympic athletes. And I'm very excited about that. So check it out at muscleandbodymag.com. Check out wellbella.com. This month I interview 80s supermodel Carol Alt. And I will keep you posted on the Three's Company front, the sitcom front, the retro front, the everything front. But first, I am proud to announce our special guest for this episode, writer, author, academic heavyweight David Misch, whose new tome, Funny the Book, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Comedy, is now in stores. It's available at funnythebook.com. Check it out. He wrote for Mork Mindy, The Muppets Take Manhattan, briefly at Saturday Night Live, and also he was an executive story editor of the Police Squad series in the early 80s. He really has written this fascinating book that, to quote PR material, explores the evolutionary, psychological, scientific, philosophical, and even theological underpinnings of humor. The author concludes that comedy is God. It's an Olympian effort with this book, Funny the Book, and given all of this reimagining of funny lately and remembering Sherman Hemsley and his little crazy trickster role on The Jeffersons, David will tell you what a trickster is here as we go back in time with David Misch. Thank you again for taking the time here.
Certainly.
I love your book, Funny the Book, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Comedy. I'm amazed by how much you packed in there, and yet it's very readable and approachable. I mean, your book has it all, from Aristotle to Charlie Chaplin and Robin Williams and Monkey Urine and Pam Dauber. All in one
order
package.
of importance? I hope not.
Right. But we always save the best for last. It's like,
yeah.
And Joan Collins and Dynasty. So what inspired your detailed, historical, yet hysterical undertaking here? It is a mammoth undertaking.
I was inspired by mankind's oldest source of inspiration, desperation for something to do. I've been a screenwriter for many years, and that I'm getting older, and that field appears to be less accessible to me. Although I'm still doing a little there. And then I've done some teaching, but I was looking for something else, and I'd been teaching a course at USC on comedy, and a friend who's a literary agent suggested making it into a book. And given that the book would cover about 1/10 of the material I gathered for the course, I figured that is doable. But more broadly and more seriously, what I was really doing my whole life is I like dissecting things, except in biology class. But I love figuring out how things work. And from the very beginning, I was fascinated by those behind-the-scenes documentaries about how films and TV shows get some of the effects they do. And I mean, by effects, I mean comedy effects, and how things are set up and how they actually work in order to give you the feeling you get. And I wanted to sort of figure out what made comedy tick. And, the old saying is that if you examine comedy, you kill it. And I thought that didn't make sense, because if you examine classical music, you don't kill it. If you examine tragedy, you don't kill it. And it seems to me people say if you explain a joke, it's no longer funny. And I would say, well, that's true if you don't tell the joke first. If you tell the joke, you get your laugh, and then you explain it. So I just wanted to see if I could try to tell people what comedy was really about and still keep the fun in it.
Yeah, and you did. And, you mentioned your interest in the behind-the-scenes documentaries and such. And I want to talk to you here in a bit about Mork and Mindy, but you more recently wrote and produced NBC's Behind the Camera Look at Mork and Mindy.
That is true.
How bizarre was that for you to do that?
Well, in one sense it was bizarre, but in another sense it made perfect sense. At least someone who was there was doing it. And, we were not able to do everything within complete accuracy, although some of the more significant parts of it, dealing with Robin's life, had to be done with pinpoint accuracy or we would have been sued.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time going over a lot of sources to make sure that everything was completely accurate word by word.
Yes.
But anyway, it was interesting to revisit that, and I think I was hired for that primarily because I could write convincing Mork and Mindy dialogue. In fact, I took some of the newly written dialogue from rejected Mork and Mindy scripts.
Cool.
It was very accurate in that sense. But, it was really interesting to go back after so many years and look back on those times. And, and the guy who played Robin, Chris Diamantopoulos, who, and by the way, I'm so good at saying that name now. It took me like a month to learn to say it. I had to go syllable by syllable. Now it just rolls off my tongue. But he played Mo in the Three Stooges movie. Very talented actor.
That's right. Well, how cool is that? Well, that was a fun movie you did, and you're right. It certainly made sense for someone who was there to write it and produce it. Incidentally, I was in the NBC movie about Three's Company that Joyce DeWitt was very involved in. It really grew out of my behind-the-scenes book about Three's Company, and I was a consulting producer. And I know Joyce being there was, imperative. So I thought it was really cool to see that they got you to write and produce that movie.
Yeah, I guess it was the same thing. And we know the same people then. We worked for the same people.
Yeah, exactly.
Making the movie. And that was great fun, and I saw that as well. It was very interesting.
Very much so. Well, let's rewind. Your book rewinds to the beginning of time. Your reference there on page 3 or 4 about the Neanderthal tripping over the log and creating comedy and then falling into the pit and dying and creating irony, that made me laugh.
So, that was the idea.
It was great. Well, tell us about your funny journey. You began as a comic folk singer and then stand-up in the 70s, then to be a sitcom writer for a stand-up. What was that journey like for you, particularly in the 70s?
Well, it was great fun. I mean, I thought I was going to be a performer, and I had some degree of success, but I never had the blood drive for it. I never wanted to, quote, kill the audience like most comics do, and I never fed off the untrammeled love that they would shoot from the audience, which other comics loved. I didn't want to have a personal relationship with the audience, and I didn't want them to fall down laughing hysterically. I wanted them to nod and think, gee, that's clever, which is not really what you should be feeling as a stand-up.
Right.
And that's why I moved into, and I also had stage fright, terrible stage fright, and never got over it. So I was happy to finally get behind what we then called typewriters and begin writing. But I had fun when I was performing, and I had some interesting gigs and interesting times. But I must say my whole body sighed with relief when I gave that up.
But what great preparation for you then to write for Robin Williams. And yet you say in the book that the legend of Mork and Mindy was that Robin ad-libbed everything. What was it really like for you as a writer, given his propensity to ad-lib, but really not being able to use what he did because it was maybe a little too blue? What was that process like for you?
Well, it was interesting. It was unqualifiedly fantastic to have Robin as our star, and I hope I made that clear in the book, that we gave him entire credit for it. But the rumor that he, ad-libbed everything was simply untrue. And it wasn't because he wasn't a genius. It's because that's not really how TV works. I mean, if Robin was ad-libbing all the time, what were the other actors supposed to do?
There would be no story.
Yeah, it would be very difficult. And Robin wouldn't want it. Robin, like any great improviser, doesn't want to completely be on their own. What they want is for you to write something lame and then for them to come up with something better. So every word of the script was written ahead of time. And as I mentioned in the book, Funny the book, when he would ad-lib, very frequently it was dirty, because that's the kind of guy Robin is, and not in a horrible way, but in a sort of innocent dirtiness, which was his stock and trade. We had nuns in the audience, and he'd be swearing up a storm and grabbing himself in the crotch and stuff, and they'd be doubled over with laughter. It was impossible for Robin to offend people.
That's true.
But we wrote everything out, and then once in a while he'd come up with something better, and all of the time he would say lines, which in my humble opinion were not always that great. He'd say them with such great expressions and faces and body movements that it would take what we had made okay and just make it spectacular.
Right.
So it was all due to him, and I think everyone else associated with the show give them all credit, but we don't give him credit for writing the show because he didn't.
Right. There is a difference there.
Yeah.
You know, you're very cerebral, as people will certainly discover when they read the book, and I love the anecdote that you share about Garry Marshall calling you in, who was, of course, executive producing Mork and Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, and said to you, "You're witty," and you were like, "Oh, great." He said, "We don't do witty, we do funny."
Exactly. Yeah, and he had a very good point. And also Garry was not an idiot. He's one of the geniuses of TV.
Yeah.
And he wasn't saying wit was bad. He was saying it's not what we do.
Right.
There are other shows that are witty. That's not what we do. What we do is we make people laugh loudly.
Yes, out loud. And how satisfying or unsatisfying was that sort of adjustment for you? And then how did that compare to, was your next job being executive story editor of Police Squad series, which, of course, years later would become the Naked Gun movies? How did those two experiences stack up for you in terms of just being satisfying as a writer and a joke teller?
It's fascinating how everything's different, but when you're a professional in any field, and certainly as a comedy writer, you adapt to whatever circumstance you're given. I don't think I'd ever really written, I think, one joke in my life before I joined Mork and Mindy, and I can tell you what the joke was. It was the one-liner in my stand-up act, which was very conceptual, sort of Monty Python-like, with different characters and situations, but not jokes per se. But my one joke was, I broke up with my girlfriend a while ago. It was unfortunate, but we had religious differences. She was an atheist, and at the time I thought I was God. So that was my joke, which, whether it's good or not, is not exactly sitcom joke.
Right.
But then when I got on Mork and Mindy, I had no choice but to try to be funny in that way, and by God, it turned out I could. So that was cool. And then Police Squad was very different. Zucker, Zucker, the two brothers and their friend who did Airplane, and then, as you say later, the Naked Gun series that came out of Police Squad, they took comedy very seriously in a way different than the Mork guys, who were mostly gag writers, mostly guys who had done sitcoms and jokes. With Police Squad, there was a lot more analysis of why something was funny and why something wasn't. And we would have discussions about it, and they took it seriously, as I do in the book, talking about how the placement of a word in a sentence can be absolutely critical to whether you get a laugh. The number of syllables, the types of words, as I say in the book, there's comedy rules about hard Ks being funnier than soft consonants, like a D. So, a kick in the pants is funnier than a boot in the behind.
Yeah, it is.
And the funniest animal in the world is a duck. And the reason for that is, first of all, they look funny. Second of all, it's a one-syllable sharp word with a hard K at the end of it. And third of all, it rhymes with a dirty word. So what could be better?
Would the second be yak, maybe?
Yeah. Well, actually, Woody Allen has a line I'll never forget in one of his short stories. He said that a woman entered his office who had a set of curves that could cause cardiac arrest in a yak. And I looked at that line. It's just such a brilliantly written line, and it ends with a one-syllable hard K word. And if he'd said duck, it wouldn't have really fit.
Right.
But he knew where he was coming from when he wrote that sentence.
He sure did. And you cover Woody Allen, and you cover the legendary Steve Martin and the way he changed stand-up. You cover all of this in the book. What was the most interesting aspect of the history of comedy for you to explore in the book?
Well, I ended up finding almost all of the different segments interesting. And, there's also a section on essentially neuroscience in this book about how the chemical dopamine affects the brain and how that's part of the humor process. And believe me, I was not heavily into neuroscience before writing this book. So in the same way, it wasn't like I was a big history guy and I wasn't, lounging around with reading books about ancient Rome. But in looking at humor's roots, it was absolutely fascinating to see how so much of what we have today was back then as well. Two examples are they had, I'm spacing on the name, but there was in Italian Commedia dell'arte, they had a thing, ends with CCI, but was it Lacci? Something like that, which were essentially gags. And they had a list of like 25 of these gags like a man pretending to be an animal. And, you have that today, too. I mean, that's a standard way to get a laugh. So it's fascinating the way they were codified, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And then it's another thing from Commedia dell'arte that people find quite interesting is that this was a form of outdoor, broad humor with just a few actors and no props, but one of the few props they had, and out of it came the Punch and Judy puppet shows. They're essentially a puppet form of commedia.
Right.
But one of the few props they had was a board with two slats on it that would make a sharp, loud noise when you hit someone, so it would sound worse than it actually was, and then the other person would fall over, and that was called bataccio, which was the Italian word for the slap stick.
Wow, the primitive Three Stooges, primitive Three's Company.
Uh-huh.
Well, and that's what's so funny. What some people don't realize is shows like Mork and Mindy and even Three's Company, they didn't just exist in a vacuum of the innuendo, slapsticky 70s. They go back to the roots of comedy, and I think you draw all those connections in the book.
Well, actually, one of my favorite jokes, and it's not a rib-tickling joke, but it's one that makes you go, is, and I mentioned it in the book, is I'm trying to defend why in the book I have so much that is not contemporary. There's a lot of contemporary. I do a whole chapter on The Office, for instance, but a lot of the examples are from old times, and the reason is this joke. Guy reads Hamlet for the first time, and a friend says, "So how'd you like it?" And he says, "That's nothing but a bunch of quotations." And my point is that when you know what the roots of comedy are, then, whatever the new hit comedy is will just seem like a bunch of quotations because everyone is building on the work of other people.
That's right. That's very, very true. A couple more questions. I grew up watching Mork and Mindy. I had the little Mork and the egg action figure, the whole bit.
Oh, my gosh, that's great.
Oh, my God. I remember this tall girl in second grade had Mork and Mindy pants, and so anytime I would look up, I would see her Mork and Mindy on her butt. So it is ingrained in culture. How did Mork fit into, you discuss in the books, I guess, sort of the archetypes of comic characters. Was he a trickster, a jester, or like a hybrid?
Well, actually, the character of Mork is a little less of a trickster than the character of Robin Williams. Robin Williams is the prototypical trickster, and for all sorts of reasons. Trickster, well, first of all, we should explain. So trickster is essentially the mythological forerunner of all comedy. He, and they're almost always men, appears in every culture and every civilization the world has ever known, and they're always the troublemaker, the person who upends conventional society with all sorts of methods like tricking the powerful, con games, practical jokes, and most of all through playing with language, playing with words, puns, double entendres, malaprops, oxymorons. So anyone who sort of makes trouble is a trickster. And what's fascinating is how these characters are defying the rules that society has set up so that we can have a society that won't end up killing each other. They defy them, which should be something we would be offended by, and yet they're always characters who we find lovable and fascinating, probably because they're acting out in ways that we'd like to.
Right.
And one of the ways they act out is in this sort of childlike way. They are unfettered by conventional society and rules. They just let out whatever they feel. They say and do the things that children will say and do because they don't know any better.
Yes.
And Robin Williams is just a perfect example of that. I always said that the key to him is he had no superego. He never had a voice that said, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't do that. His method was to allow anything to happen. Now, the result was he would say things that weren't funny. He would say things that were offensive. But it didn't matter because you knew his heart was pure and his intentions were good, like a child's.
Yes.
And so he expressed so much that was within all of us that sometimes we weren't even aware of. So he is really a prototypical trickster, but you can find echoes of him, that character, all history.
Wow, that's very cool. I didn't fully make that connection, but you're absolutely right, him being a trickster. You talk about the defining characteristics of comedy, and one of them being violating boundaries and turning things on their head. In essence, isn't all comedy designed to subvert something? Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. In fact, I think I'm trying to remember Freud's quote. It was comedy, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was essentially comedy is always against something. Comedy is always subversive. You can't have comedy that's not subversive. Now, there are different ways to do that. And you can say, what's subversive about an elephant joke or a real simple kid's joke? And yet there is, because it's subversive in the sense of violating the boundaries of language. When you say a word has more than one meaning, you are being subversive.
That's
because the powers that be want us to think only in lineal ways. If this is this, it can't be that. The trickster says, no, there's different ways of looking at things. Alice's great line in Alice in Wonderland, actually, I think it's the caterpillar who says, she says something like, you can't have a word that means more than one thing. No, you can't believe that. That's impossible. He says, on a good day, I can believe a dozen impossible things before breakfast. And that's what comedy is about, is making the impossible real, taking things that shouldn't exist, that we are told not to exist, and we're playing with language and playing with ideas in a way that is inherently subversive to the placid, tranquil, ordered society that the powers that be would like us to believe in.
I love it. I mean, who knew that double entendres were empowering, They were... Who knew?
Well, there's another thing, too, which is another one of my favorite quotes, which is in the book Tom Stoppard. He's a famous playwright. He said, laughter is the sound of comprehension. And the fact is, any joke is essentially a mystery or riddle that we have to solve when we hear the punchline. We think, we laugh because we're thinking, I get it. That means when he said that, it really meant that. We're putting together things. It requires brain power. Anytime we are using our brains, anytime we are engaged in critical thinking, it's dangerous.
It
because
is.
People on top don't want us to think critically. They want us to just accept that words mean what they say they mean. But when we say, no, words can mean more than one thing, and I can come up with other ways of looking at that, it's dangerous to society.
Oh, that's fascinating. And, to me, I've always found, being an outsider growing up, that comedy, and I would argue especially being self-deprecating, that is power for the disenfranchised. I mean, you mentioned Phyllis Diller and how she was even sort of self-misogynistic and as a forerunner for women in comedy. I mean, I guess the inverse of that, is that why we rarely see beautiful white people who are funny?
Well, that's changing. I've been asked a lot in the last year or so about the role of women in comedy, and up until a year or two ago, it was very simple. It was subservient. Of course, there are always exceptions to every rule, and there have been in every era. There have been funny girls, Fanny Bryce, the funny girl, Carol Lombard, Lucille Ball, Tina Fey now. But even after Tina, it's only in the last year or two that I really think women are getting their due, and being attractive is inherently aggressive, because men feel like, I want to make love to that woman, and women feel threatened by them. And that is beginning, I think, to change. Sarah Silverman is pretty unquestionably very attractive.
Right.
And there are now others, too. And Sarah Silverman doesn't specifically use her attractiveness. In fact, she jokes about it sometimes, and she, in a very mock egotistical way, which is essentially making fun of the whole idea of being attractive. I think the time of the funny, attractive white woman has come. Thank God for that.
I love that. And you're going to be moderating a panel about women in comedy this fall, is that right?
Yeah, at the California Women's Conference in Long Beach. September 24th is my date. The conference goes on for a few days. Yeah, and I haven't heard too much yet. The panel isn't complete yet. But I think the idea is they wanted to have a neutral observer. I think they were afraid that if a woman was doing it, there would be a bit of competition, which would have happened with men as well.
Right.
But, and so maybe if it was a male conference, it would be a female moderator. But I think that's the idea I'm looking for. Basically, I've been told it's going to be 30,000 women and me, and I like those odds.
That sounds pretty good, huh?
It does to me. I mean, if only like 10,000 of them find me physically attractive, that would be great.
Hey, the odds are great there.
Yeah.
You mentioned Lucy, of course, the queen of TV comedy. I always saw, I hope I'm making sense here, but I always saw John Ritter as Jack Tripper as sort of a male Lucy. And in fact, she would come on the show and host the Best of Three's Company and really validated the show in that way.
Well, can I stop you for one sec? Because you hit on something that you said before.
Yeah.
Because Lucille Ball, most people don't know this, but in the 40s, she was a starlet. She was a gorgeous woman.
A blonde.
And she was in dramas most of the time. So she deliberately made herself look a little less gorgeous. She was playing a housewife in I Love Lucy. She was still very attractive, but she wasn't a glamour puss like she was in the 40s.
That's right.
And so really, if you talk about attractive women in comedy, she would certainly be at the top of the list. And really the thing she did that was so amazing is she was willing to debase herself. She was willing to fall on her face. She was willing to get messed up. And the idea of a beautiful woman getting messed up, there's something inherently funny about that.
That's right.
And again, I'll go back to Carole Lombard in the 30s, who did the same thing. She took pratfalls galore. She had no sort of arrogance about that. She was willing to get down and dirty with the guys, and it's really liberating to see that.
It absolutely is. I mean, Lucy would take a pie in the face, pizza dough over the head. She did it all. And I didn't make that connection. She did start out as a blonde bombshell, really.
Yeah. By the way, the longest recorded laugh in television history is, I'm forgetting, it's a Lucy laugh. And it had to do with her stuffing something down her shirt. I can't remember the chocolate scene. But that's the longest recorded laugh in TV history.
And everyone has been trying to rival the iconic laugh power of Lucy. How did someone like an Ellen, who, again, I saw as a female Jack Tripper, so it was sort of, if he was the inside out of Lucy, then she was the inside out of Jack Tripper, and really, in a way, that came full circle from Lucy to Ellen. But being that she was a bit asexual, how did she break boundaries for women in comedy in the 90s?
Well, the asexuality is, of course, key because, as everyone later found out, she was gay, and that's why she was acting asexual.
Right.
But because she didn't want that to get out and ruin her career. But it got out, and it didn't ruin her career.
She
If
survived.
anything, she became more famous, yeah. But what's interesting there is that, she was never seen as, sexy aside from the fact that she wasn't playing that.
Right.
As a woman, she was not seen as particularly attractive. She was not unattractive. She was just sort of there.
Right.
But after she came out, she's a cover girl. She's a spokeswoman for a couple of makeups and things like that. So I think, again, she has a sort of unthreatening prettiness, which is something that people can accept without men feeling I got to have her and women feeling, she'll take away my man. So that's key to her, the sort of Katie Couric innocent gorgeousness as opposed to the sex pot one. But in terms of comedy, she was a very smart comedian with a very unique delivery, which I have now seen done by a number of other people. There's a female comic now who I quite like named Amy Schumer, who is really groundbreaking. She tells really outrageous, over-the-line jokes.
Blonde, right? She's a blonde, attractive, young stand-up. Is that who I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But she does the same thing that Ellen did, which she would have a lot of the joke after the joke. That is, she'd say the punchline, and then she'd sort of mutter something as a throwaway, which would make it even funnier.
Absolutely.
And that's a really interesting kind of delivery that I had not seen much before Ellen.
Very good observation there. Well, I think that the Women in Comedy panel will be very interesting. One more question on that. In the book, you say that in film comedy, really women are still sort of like second-class citizens.
Well, I wrote the book 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I would not say that now.
I
think Kristen Wiig changed everything, and I don't know it's just Bridesmaids, because there are funny women movies before that. But I think it was a combination of the movie, which I thought was great, and Kristen Wiig's performance, which I thought went beyond comedy in the same way Steve Carell did in The Office. It brought a depth and realness to it. But beyond that, I think the culture was just ready. That whole crap about women aren't funny was starting to be embarrassing even to the people who said it.
Right.
And suddenly a movie came along that was so unquestionably hilarious and was really about actual women and actual things, along with being incredibly dirty and incredibly broad, but also smart and real. All that combination, it feels to me like the barrier finally fell. It feels like now you just can't say women aren't funny or women can't make funny movies anymore.
That's
and
right.
I think that once that door has been opened, it's not going to shut again. Again, there have been many examples of funny women through history, but what I was talking about in the book about there being second-class citizens is very often you would get a woman in a comedy whose only job was to laugh at the hilarious antics of the male star.
Right.
I remember seeing Albert Brooks is a genius, one of the great comedians ever, but one of his movies, Defending Your Life, had Meryl Streep as his co-star. And I couldn't help being struck by, in scene after scene, all she does is laugh helplessly at how funny and brilliant he is. Now I haven't seen Ted yet, the new movie by Seth MacFarlane, the Family Guy creator.
Yes.
But evidently Mila Kunis, who has shown in movie after movie that she's unbelievably brilliant as a comedienne, her main function is to look pretty and laugh.
Right.
And so it just keeps happening over and over, but I don't think it's going to, I think it's in the minority now. I don't think as many movies are going to get away with hiring a woman to be pretty and laugh.
That's right. The women are taking over. I mean, going back to TV with Lucy and then Roseanne knocked down walls. Funny that TV, the walls were knocked down a lot sooner than in film. Do you have an idea as to why that was the case?
I'm going to make a guess and say that to some degree men rule the movie box office and women control the TV remote. Women are a little more, I think, interested in TV because movies, especially nowadays, are not really as often about relationships, which women are frequently, not always, but frequently more into. It's sort of like porn. One reason women, I think, don't like it is because they aren't real people. It's just body parts.
Right.
And men seem to have less of a problem with body parts. But if you combine the two, then you get something, both parts of life. And I'm wildly generalizing here. I know women who would be perfectly happy with body parts, and I know men who are horrified by such things. But in general, I think that's true. And women in the 70s and 80s, there began to be more and more female showrunners of sitcoms.
Yes.
And they had a huge effect on, Murphy Brown and things like that.
Diane
And
English.
Roseanne, really changing the way women were in TV, essentially making them the stars of the shows and the sensibility behind the shows. Mm-hmm. Whereas in film, it's not so much. Up until the last year or two, it's been very difficult for women to direct comedies and direct comedies that appeal, especially to the 14-year-old boys who, everyone has to admit, are the primary generators of box office in America. That's why, Spider-Man is seen 15 times in a weekend. It's not, generally speaking, it's not 25-year-old women who are going back so many times.
Yeah, and maybe that explains why we never saw a sequel to The First Wives Club, which just blew my mind. Where's the sequel to that,
Could be.
You have such a grasp of the history of comedy and the contemporary examples. People have to buy Funny the book, and they can meet you if they're in Hollywood on July 26th. Tell us about the Book Soup event.
I'm just going to be talking at Book Soup, 7 o'clock Thursday the 26th. 20-minute talk and then a 10-minute question and answer and then a brief photo session. And I have to say right up front, I will not do sexual poses for free. That's $10 extra.
So bring your $10 bills.
And you can stuff them directly into my pants. I'll be honest. I don't require a wallet for this.
Well, David, you're a very funny guy, and you've had such a varied, interesting career in TV and academia, and we wish you so much success with the book and beyond. And thanks for being a guest here. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Dreams can be very funny things. Sometimes funny ha-ha, but usually more than anything, funny strange. And this week we talked to our dream analyst again, Yvonne Reba, and she shares with us a continuation of a client series of dreams regarding major changes in her life. At 50-something, dealing with some serious transitions, death, a desire to change her career, and so forth. And last time, Yvonne told us about a dream the client had recently about being pregnant and how that tied into this idea of really being proactive in recreating your life. That's the reimagined version of procreation. Well, this time Yvonne tells us about a second extended dream that the same client has, using different imagery, different symbols to get this same message through to her client via Yvonne's interpretation. So it's some funny stuff, but mostly funny strange, funny weird, but Yvonne has a grasp of all the different meanings of our nocturnal subconscious, and we will check in with her. But before we do, check out her website at YvonneReba.com. That's YvonneRyba.com. And if you have any dreams you'd like Yvonne to interpret, give us a shout here at retroality@comcast.net. And now let's check in with our resident Dreamweaver. Hello again, Yvonne.
Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
I am great. It's always great to talk to you. And last time we spoke, you gave us a dream about a client of yours that involved a pregnancy, but it was symbolic of a change she was going through in her life and how it overlapped into your life. And then you said you had another dream from the same client. Does this sort of continue this theme?
Yeah, this is like, your serial dreams here. Just follow up. Right, yeah, this is the same person, and just to refresh everybody's memory, it's a very intelligent, independent woman, early 50s. She has looked after herself all her life. She is trying to change things. She does not like the job she's got. She desperately wants to change that. She just had a major operation. She's recuperating.
Wow.
She's had a death in the family recently.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes, one of her parents died. All of these things have suggested that this is like a big turning point this year for her.
Yes.
To get where she wants to be, to get what she wants out of life and to change into, well, not change into a different person, but to allow parts of her that have been kept back, if you like, the creative and more feminine part of her. Not that she's a manly person, but because of her job, she's very assertive, outgoing, and sometimes quite aggressive in her approach to things. And that last dream was telling her that, listen, we're coming to the more feminine thing here. Let's be more creative. Let's not be thinking too much about the money side of things. The money will come.
Right.
That was also something. You have to have faith here that if you're doing what you really want to do, it's going to bring you the abundance that you want.
Yes.
That's part of, my philosophy anyway.
So she's having to really shift her thinking, having been in a career where she's had a lot of success financially, doing a certain thing, accessing a certain aspect of herself, and now she's got this more feminine, creative side, dreamy side, really, trying to break through, and you're giving her some clues on what her subconscious is telling her.
Her subconscious is giving her the clues, and I'm helping her to get to them.
You're interpreting
She's
them
also
for her.
doing a master's degree and going to go on to a PhD after this. So she is working very hard, and then she had this dream I'm going to tell you now.
Great.
So, now this dream is I think of it as in 3 acts. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a lot of dreams. You whip from one thing to the next, and there's no quite sort of continuity to it, but there is, in a sense, when we get to analyze it.
Yeah.
So she dreamt that she was at a friend's right before a party, and she was helping this friend to prepare. Now, the friend had on a ring with a detailed carved design attached to it that was large, very thin, and it looked like it could break. In other words, it was fragile. It was dark ruby in color, and may have been a ruby, but it could have been some type of plastic. She wasn't sure. And looking at it, the design, this flat piece, fell off. And when she looked at it, it looked like it had just been held on by glue to the ring top, which was flat. Now, the hostess didn't want her husband to know that this ring had been damaged, so she asked the dreamer to take it to the crafter jeweler. And so the dreamer sets off. But the party's already starting. And in her haste to get there and back again, she ran out into the backyard where there was a pool. And there actually is a pool at this friend's house. However, it wasn't the same looking pool because it looked like some kind of sacred design where there were layers within each other. This is her description of it. And it was very shallow, maybe only a foot deep. So she was running like crazy, and she fell into this pool, okay? So someone helped her out. And she remembered being very careful, holding this ruby design top for the ring so that it wouldn't break. Then we switch scenes. The next part of the dream, I'm in an SUV with a man. We're racing through this country town, going to where we need to go, when he sees this retired cop, who in the past has had it in for him. Now, the cop was just going into his house. We go past him as he's at the gate to his property. We managed to get past without him recognizing my male friend, although we weren't sure at first because he'd turned as we were driving by. But my friend was wearing a hat similar to the Indiana Jones hat and turned his head in time. Yeah, that's kind of funny. So she said the cop didn't recognize her male friend. And then the scene changes again. Next, I'm in a hospital where I volunteered to be a research subject. The only thing is that the drug being researched on will end my life.
Oh, wow.
Well, first, yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Who's doing research on that? Testing it out on people. Yeah. Oh, funny. First you take the drug, and then a nurse comes in, and then you take it again, and everything stops, or so I'm told. So this old guy is there, and he's taken the drug. I didn't yet take it like I was supposed to, because I'm curious. The nurse comes in to check on me, and I think she realizes that I haven't really taken the drug. But I notice her give the old guy the second dose and how he just passes. The nurse then is coming for me. And I get the impression that she's going to be sure that I get my doses properly. Yeah. There is some fear in me that her participation has some hidden agenda or evilness associated with it. And that's the end of the drink.
And so these were three seemingly disjointed sort of vignettes, but you feel they're three acts of one dream.
Absolutely. And when I started to analyze it, I've got to say, you know, our subconscious has a great sense of humor sometimes. You picked up on, like the Indiana Jones hat for a start. So, let's go back to the first part and see what we get.
Yes, at the party.
Okay. That's the party. Now, parties are a common dream, okay? Many people dream that they're having a party, going to have a party, whatever. Parties are about celebration, or they can be about things like graduation in a symbolic way, that you're graduating from one level of life or one stage in your life to the next stage. And it can be an initiation, right? Now, it's interesting that the woman that she chose in the dream to have the party has actually had all three of these things happen to her just recently. She was initiated as she became a minister, and she graduated into that too, and she had a big celebration. Okay, she had several, as a matter of fact. So, but she was picked as a symbol of somebody who has already got where she wants to be.
I see.
Okay. Now, she, the dreamer, is helping prepare for this. In other words, she is also preparing, in a sense, for a party, but she didn't get to have her party yet because she has to go on this mission with this ring, or the top of the ring anyway. Now, the ring had a detailed carved design that was large, very thin, and looked like it could break. And sure enough, it breaks. It doesn't break into pieces, it breaks off the ring. Now, rings, yes, what are rings symbolic of? Well, it's interesting because rings are circles, so it can represent a cycle of events.
The circle of life.
Yes, that's right, circle of life. A promise when you get married or you have an engagement ring, it's a promise. Or perhaps, again, an initiation symbol. You know, like a Master Mason would have a ring, or, you know, different fraternities have rings, and so on. The design is not attached. It's separate. It has to be glued on. And it's a ruby, or it's ruby-colored. Well, rubies represent something precious. And when I saw this in the dream, my first thought was how the Bible compares a good woman as to be, well, even more precious than rubies, right? And I thought, again, here we go with the feminine side.
Right.
Now, she didn't tell me in this part of the dream what this ring looked like. So I emailed her and said, what is this design like? And she told me that it was complicated, but it had a Celtic flavor to it. And her ancestry is Irish and Scottish, I think. And she's very attached to Celtic things. So that would make sense as well, because she associates Celtic thing with esoteric knowledge, spirituality, and so on. So there again, it's a spiritual thing, this ring, which it is. I mean, when you look at wedding rings and things, it is a sign of your promise, your spiritual promise, as it were, to live together and keep that promise.
Right.
So she is having this design. She's got it. In a sense, although the dream said that it belonged to the hostess, she's the one who has it in her hand. She's the one who falls into the pool. Now, the pool, all water represents life, spirit, if you like, sometimes. This pool has a sacred design to it. Layers within eeach other, she said, although it's shallow. It's not a dangerous pool. On the other hand, shallow can also refer to something like, well, I think one of the things I thought about was perhaps this pool represented, again, a form of baptism or an initiation into something, right?
Right.
And she keeps the ring safe because it's part of her sacred design, too. And with this, she can enter into a new place in her life. It's a kind of talisman, if you like. Keep this ring safe. And then you get dipped in the sacred pool, and so on. Now, there are many cultures where it's not just, you know, recently that people have been dipped in water as a sign of starting a new life. You know, when John the Baptist did it to Jesus, but it was going a long time before that. Water's always represented the cleansing, you know, of not just the body, but also the inner being.
Sure.
You know, many Hindus wade into the Ganges and so on, and that's their ritual, and they've been doing that for thousands of years, I think. So, going to the crafted jeweler, I thought that was God. when you take your ring back to the jeweler who created it in the first place, it's the creator, okay? And we're all creators of our own lives, too.
The divine designer.
That's right, the divine designer. You're right. So that first part of the dream was all about, we are again at the beginning of some cycle, a new cycle of events in your life, and you need to be preparing for it. You need to prepare for the dip in the sacred pool, for the sacred design on the ring. All of these are talismans or emblems of starting something fresh. And, of course, rings are symbolic of partnerships as well, getting married.
Right.
Looking forward to something that's it's joyful and completes you. So there's a lot of stuff going on in her life, and this is all about getting ready for it and preparing herself, making sure that she knows she has to prepare now for what is to come. It's just like if you're going to run the marathon, you don't just get up on the day and run the marathon. You practice for a long time beforehand. We all have to do that. We all have to start preparing for what we're expecting ourselves to be able to do. So then we get into the next part of the dream. Are you ready for this?
I am so ready. Okay. This is the Indiana Jones part, right?
Yeah, the Indiana Jones hat. So she's in an SUV with a man. Now, I emailed her and said, who's driving this thing? Because that's important. When you dream of vehicles, you want to see who's driving it. If it's you, you're in charge of this vehicle, whatever's happening to it. This is a man driving it, and he's racing around with his Indiana Jones hat on, and he sees a cop, okay, a retired cop, but somebody he'd known from the past, obviously. Now, cops or policemen in dreams are signs of really helpful signs. They are there to protect us, to look after us. Of course, if you're somebody who's had a lot of trouble with the police, this may not be true. Your dream might be the opposite. But she hasn't had trouble with the police. So to me, it was, again, it said both of these characters in the SUV are you. The man is your masculine side, who is driving the vehicle at the moment. Again, he's racing around here, and he knows he's not supposed to do something like that, because when he sees the policeman, the cop, he tries to avoid being noticed, right? He tries to, get away with it and not look at him. Now, the hat is, of course, a perfect symbol for this kind of behavior. Here's somebody who's reckless, diving into, adventures, if you like, but I seem to remember that Indiana is always in trouble and always getting caught out, and people are chasing him and so on. So, definitely masculine, right. Not that women don't get into trouble, but this is what I was thinking was, and this is what I wrote. This asked, is she driving? And then I found she wasn't. Racing in a car means going fast in life. The police are usually a sign of help is available. But here, a retired cop sounds like someone who's not fully engaged in their work anymore. So this cop is not necessarily there to be helpful. He is set apart a little bit, but he's still watchful. He still could be somebody who could say, you're not doing as you should. Which the male friend, of course, is your male side. The hat, the symbol of the adventurer or the explorer. And there is risk here. Going too fast, hiding from authority, and so on. And yet, so far, you're getting away with it. I think this also refers to your past, when you weren't obeying the law somehow. Now, I don't mean the law legally. I mean the universal law. The universal law says that we attract what we put out. That which we think about, as Abraham Hicks says, is that which we place our attention on is what we will have more of. And that means that whatever it is, you might say, well, I don't want that thing. But you're sitting there thinking about it, putting a lot of energy into it, right?
And there it is.
Yeah, the more you think and focus on a thing, even if it's, I hate that, I don't want it, you're sending out a signal of energy about that thing, and that thing is then going to be attracted to you whether you want it or not. So pay attention, everybody, and put out thoughts of what you want. That's the way to go. That's what I'm trying to do anyway.
Yes.
So, yes. Well, it's a good one. It's a good one. Now, she recognizes this because we've talked about this, about sabotaging herself sometimes, and we all do that. But this dream is about her, and it says, let us get back into balance here, and let us not be going too fast. And let us have more harmony between the masculine and the feminine side. And let the feminine side come forward. And let's get into this creative mode again.
Aha.
Right. So Act 3. Right. of this very long dream.
Uh-huh.
Next, I'm in a hospital where I've volunteered to be a research subject. The only thing is the drug being researched on will end my life. Well, that's I thought that was very amusing.
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, no. Let's see if this works. Right. But you have to have 2 doses as well.
Uh-huh.
Again, death is about a new beginning. We had the pregnancy dream about new life, the baby. But death is also about a new life. It's clearing away the old, letting the old die so the new can come into being.
The circle of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
the ring,
yeah.
circle of life. You're right. You got it. So
Yeah.
the old guy is really a symbol of this is how it works. You know, you get old, you die. All right?
Mm-hmm.
The old man is a symbol of that, and he passes easily. But she's not happy about this. She thinks this nurse is up to something. She's suspicious. Now, nurses, feminine, right? Most, there are male nurses, but here we have a feminine side, nurturing and healing.
Right.
What nurses are about, okay? You go in there to research a drug that kills you, that's another thing. But this is about nurturing, healing, recovering, getting to where you want to be, getting better, getting out of it. And the nurse wants her to take this drug. She must have volunteered for it anyway. Why is she in there?
Right.
But the thing is this second dose to me suggested a second chance. It suggested that there's a special thing about second, okay? And I thought to myself, well, this is saying, there's another chance coming here. Let's go for it. Let's try it. Yes, there's trepidation. There's a hidden agenda or evilness associated with it, but I put that down to our cultural attitude about death.
Right. It's
Right.
a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. People think of death as scary. Avoid it at all costs. Don't talk about it. Try and live as long as you can. It's wrong to die. It's wrong to kill yourself. It's wrong. Everybody's like, oh, my God, we can't die. Who knows what's going to happen.
Right.
Well, other cultures do not have that. They accept death as being a necessary part of life. It is the circle of life again, as you said. We are going through our lives. We will end our lives. We will move into the next place. And it's happening to each and every one of us, and we should talk about it, and we shouldn't be scared about it. I'm not saying that when you're young, you should be happy to think you're going to die. You've got your whole life ahead of you, usually, and we want to enjoy our lives. I know I do.
Sure.
And we all do. But this is what I think the evilness, as she put it, is about. I think it's like, well, how do I know what's going to happen? Well,
Right.
no, that's what happens in our adventures. We're not sure what's going to happen in our lives. You take a big jump, you might fall and hurt yourself. But if you have your spirituality intact, and remember the ring, that was a sign, of her spirituality, and it had to be stuck back on the ring.
The design.
Absolutely. The design and the ring had to come back together again. And she's in the process of working on that. And that's in between the SUV chase through the country, the research in the hospital. These are all symbols of, well, how are we going to get this ring back together again? We need to focus on balance between the male and the female sides. Can't give up being your assertive person that you are. That's the way you are. Right? Nobody expects you to suddenly become a wimp.
Right.
Right? But the creative side of you now needs to open up and flower more. And then the research, well, that's a good sign as well. Research, looking into things, finding out how things work means you're going to have to go through this door. And just to end it with, I'm going to just read a little bit about what Betty Bethard, in her dream book, wrote about dreaming of dying or death.
Okay, great.
Okay? The old is dying. Make way for new beginnings. Life is a process of death and regeneration into higher awareness. The old dying off in order for one to continue to grow. As blossoms die and fall from a tree, the tree continues to grow and change. Each little death actually strengthens the tree, for these are essential to total life unfoldment. And that's from Betty Bethard's The Dream Book, Symbols for Self-Understanding, which she wrote many years ago, and she has passed on now, but I think if you look on the internet, you might be able to find it. It was published by the Inner Light Foundation in California.
Betty Bethard.
Betty Bethard. It's Bethard.
Okay, Beth Arts, great.
Yes.
And so, taken as a whole, this dream, did you tell your client then that you feel like this is a part of her that is dying and a new part is being born, and to not fear this transition? Is that sort of how you have applied your interpretation for her?
Absolutely. And we have talked about this, and she did say just recently that she felt scared about not having money. If she, she hasn't got this job, it's the job she doesn't like, but if she gives it up, she won't have any money to live on, and she needs that to get a master's degree finished and to continue on. And of course, so she is in a place of turbulence and transition. Yes. But the subconscious is trying to say, listen, you've got it within you. She is a spiritual person. She will be able to get through this and have this baby. And she'll have help. Other people will help her. I mean, it's not just about people that she knows now. Other people will show up. And the subconscious is a wonderful examiner of the future, too. It will say, look what happened to you in the past. It's going to be okay. You manage that. You can manage this.
Good stuff. And really what you've done is you've taken two of her dreams that she had a few days apart that seemingly were disparate. One about being pregnant, the other about this ring and this falling in the pool and being in the hospital. And you've put it together into one cohesive concept for her.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're good at that, Yvonne. You're good at that.
Okay.
Well, we always enjoy hearing the adventures of the mind.
Oh, yes, in dream time. Of course. We have great adventures.
Good stuff.
It's wonderful.
And we'll be waiting to hear what you have next. Maybe one of our listeners can send us one of their dreams for you to interpret.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. Yes, I get people sending me dreams. And I have, of course, books of my own as well, but it's always good to have somebody else's, and I enjoy doing that. So, well, thank you, Chris, for letting me spout on here.
Thank you. It's fascinating. I love to learn new things. Things pop in my head when I hear you talk about another person's dream, like, that sounds a little bit like something that has gone through my dream. So we can all take a little something from that and apply it, I think.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure, Yvonne, and we'll chat again real soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
Reimagine That with Chris Mann was brought to you by Retroality TV. Copyright 2012 by Chris Mann. You can find us at retroality.tv and at reimaginethat.libsyn.com. Tweet us at retroalitytv or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/retroalitytv. And don't forget to check out our TV channel at youtube.com/retroalitytv. And we leave you this time with this classic quote: "Dying is easy, comedy is hard." And if you doubt that idiom, then just try stuffing several pounds of chocolate into your breasts like Lucille Ball.